They called her the People's Princess. But behind the photogenic smiles and flawless public appearances was a woman carrying an invisible burden, a weight that could not be eased, not even by the love of millions. Diana, Princess of Wales, was not simply living a fairy tale gone wrong. She was trapped in a psychological phenomenon known as Cassandra Syndrome, a cruel state in which someone foresees disaster, tries to warn others, but is systematically ignored, discredited, or silenced. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was cursed by Apollo. She had the gift of prophecy, but no one would ever believe her words. Thus, even as she foresaw the fall of Troy, she watched helplessly as the fate she could not prevent unfolded. Diana, in many ways, lived this same curse. She perceived with almost prophetic clarity the destructive forces moving against her, in her marriage, in the media, in the monarchy itself. But when she tried to expose her truths, she was accused of exaggerating, manipulating, or making things up. Cassandra Syndrome is not just a poetic metaphor. In psychology, it is recognized as a devastating pattern that can cause emotional isolation, chronic anxiety, and even self-destructive behaviors. Imagine knowing that something terrible is about to happen, fighting to be heard and being treated as if your words were nothing but delusions. That is exactly the abyss Diana found herself in. From early on, the princess knew her marriage to Prince Charles was not what it appeared to be. She felt the presence of another woman in his life, was aware of palace intrigues, and perceived the traps set by the press. But her confessions, interviews, and revelations were often portrayed as dramas from an emotionally unstable woman. The British monarchy and media crafted a convenient narrative that Diana was fragile, unstable, perhaps even paranoid. It was the perfect way to neutralize her voice. This dissonance between what she knew to be true and how the world perceived her was the fuel that fed her psychological suffering. Every time Diana tried to speak out about what was truly happening, infidelities, pressures, persecution, surveillance, the responses came in the form of denial or disdain. She lived Cassandra's nightmare, aware that her life was being pushed toward a tragic ending, yet powerless to convince the world to see it. And, just as in the Greek tragedy, Diana's story moved toward a fate that seemed inevitable. She herself said, in interviews and private conversations, that she did not believe she would live to old age. She predicted, with uncanny precision, that she would die young and that her death would be surrounded by mystery and conspiracy. Many called her dramatic, others paranoid. But when the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris became her final stage, Cassandra's curse seemed fulfilled. In psychology, Cassandra Syndrome is more than a mythological analogy. It is a phenomenon of progressive erosion of credibility. It begins with small invalidations, subtle comments that question the victim's perception or judgment. Over time, this dynamic becomes something far more dangerous: institutionalized gaslighting, where every attempt to expose the truth is systematically met with disbelief. In Diana's case, this manifested with almost surgical precision. When she pointed out Charles's infidelity, the constant presence of Camilla Parker Bowles, or the calculated coldness of the royal family, her words were reframed to reinforce the idea that she was emotionally unstable. Once that label was attached, it acted as a shield for those who wanted to discredit her. After all, if someone is seen as fragile or overly dramatic, everything they say can be conveniently dismissed as exaggeration. Under this kind of pressure, the mind enters a state of hypervigilance. Diana began to live in constant alertness, interpreting every gesture, every expression, every movement around her as signs of danger. This heightened sensitivity, typical of those living with Cassandra Syndrome, is both a defense and a curse. It allows one to see threats before others do, but it also amplifies the feeling of isolation, since few people share that clear and painful view of reality. Another defining aspect of the syndrome is the self-perpetuating cycle. When the victim realizes they are not being taken seriously, they tend to intensify their warnings, paradoxically making others see them as more desperate or hysterical. At key moments, Diana raised the tone of her declarations, like in her famous 1995 BBC interview, where she uttered the line that echoed worldwide, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." To the public, it sounded like a raw confession. To the monarchy, it was an unforgivable act. This pattern of speaking the truth and being punished for it creates a mental labyrinth. The victim starts to wonder, am I exaggerating? Did I really see what I think I saw? This self-doubt is devastating as it corrodes internal trust and increases dependence on external validation, which, in Diana's case, came almost exclusively from the public and rarely from those closest to her. In the princess's life, the media played an ambiguous role. It was both her stage and her prison. While tabloids and photographers fed her public image, they also distorted her words and exploited her vulnerabilities. Each time she tried to warn about persecution or threats, it was turned into a sensationalist headline, diluting the seriousness of her claims. Cassandra Syndrome is not just the suffering of being disbelieved. It is the suffocating experience of watching your own reputation be destroyed, knowing that the truth is within reach, but beyond the ears that could make a difference. For Diana, this not only deepened her loneliness but paved the way for the fate she had predicted years earlier with disturbing clarity. As the years passed, Diana's life became a chessboard where every move seemed watched, every word analyzed, every gesture interpreted with ulterior motives. The mechanism of hypervigilance, already triggered by Cassandra Syndrome, began to be fueled by concrete experiences of persecution. Not imagined but documented, Diana often spoke of feeling watched, followed, spied upon, and although many attributed this to paranoia, later investigations revealed she was not entirely wrong. Her cars were chased by paparazzi at high speed, her phone calls were possibly intercepted, and even close friends believed her movements were monitored. When you live in a constant state of disbelief but have visible proof that your fears are real, the sensation is twofold, of being lucid and, at the same time, condemned to be treated like a lunatic. This is the core of the psychological torture Cassandra Syndrome inflicts. Diana's perception of her own fate deepened through a series of events and private confessions. In letters and recordings sent to confidants, she made it clear, "My life is in danger." She spoke of powerful forces wanting her silenced, of accidents that could be staged, of the inevitable fate approaching. It was not a vague fear, it was a conviction. And when a conviction is born inside someone who already lives under the weight of constant disbelief, it becomes an absolute truth, regardless of who listens. Cassandra Syndrome also amplifies the ability to connect dots others ignore. Diana interpreted small signs, sudden changes in the behavior of royal family members, discreet warnings from friends, the aggressive way the press pursued her, as pieces of a dark puzzle. The more she tried to warn about this pattern, the stronger the official narrative became that she was becoming unstable. This disconnect between perception and validation is deadly to the mind. It erodes mental health, leads to emotional exhaustion, and paradoxically can push the victim into isolation, making them even more vulnerable. Diana alternated between periods of intense public exposure and almost complete seclusion, as if trying to escape a fate she deep down believed she could not avoid. Her death, on August 31, 1997, in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, was, for many, the final act of a tragedy foretold. For those who had heard her warnings, it was not a shock, but the materialization of a premonition she had repeated many times. The cruel irony of Cassandra Syndrome is that, when disaster finally happens, there is no satisfaction in being right, only the confirmation that being correct can be as useless as never having spoken at all. For Cassandra Syndrome to thrive, it needs a hostile environment that constantly denies and distorts the victim's perception. In Diana's case, that environment was a powerful triangle: the British monarchy, the press, and public opinion. Three forces that together created an ecosystem where her voice could be heard, but rarely believed. The monarchy was the first layer of this system. With its culture of silence and rigid institutional rules, any revelation of weakness, infidelity, or internal conflict was treated as a threat to the prestige of the crown. So, when Diana spoke about her marital problems or denounced the cold treatment she received, the official response was always the same: denial and minimization. This institutional denial, coming from one of the most respected and feared institutions in the UK, gave the instability narrative an almost unquestionable air of credibility. The second layer was the media, which acted as a distorting lens. Tabloids and sensationalist magazines needed explosive headlines, and Diana was perfect material: beautiful, charismatic, and surrounded by controversy. But there was a problem. Balanced, truthful news did not sell as well as dramatic narratives. As a result, legitimate statements were edited, taken out of context, or shaped to reinforce the idea of a fragile and emotionally unstable princess. Every public appearance became an opportunity to strengthen the caricature of Diana, rather than show the complexity of the woman behind it. The third element was the public itself. Although millions loved her, there were also those who consumed the scandals as entertainment, and even among her admirers, many preferred to believe in the myth of the suffering princess rather than face the harsh reality that she might have been exposing something far deeper and more dangerous. The romantic image of Diana as a passive victim was more comfortable than that of a woman trying to expose a closed and relentless power system. This triple siege turned Diana into a character in her own story, stripped of control over the narrative. And in the logic of Cassandra Syndrome, the more she insisted on her warnings, the easier it became for the system to label her as obsessive or unbalanced. It was a cruel game of cause and effect. The attempt to be heard fed exactly the stereotype that silenced her. In addition, the constant bombardment of media attention created a suffocating paradox. To be heard, Diana needed the press, but it was precisely the press that distorted her words. This vicious cycle kept her trapped in a public arena where every move was calculated by others, and every mistake amplified to global proportions. The monarchy knew how to play this game to its advantage, letting the press bear the burden of discrediting Diana while officially maintaining a posture of neutrality. The result? A gradual, almost imperceptible destruction of the princess's reputation, until she was seen more as a romantic tragedy than a legitimate whistleblower. The mind can endure a lot, but when the pressure is constant and disbelief becomes routine, the body begins to pay the price. In Princess Diana's case, this was evident. Her struggle with eating disorders, such as bulimia, became public, and she herself admitted that this behavior was a desperate attempt to regain some control over her life. When the world insists on ignoring your truth, controlling something, even if it's your own body, can feel like the only way to reaffirm your existence. Cassandra Syndrome is not just psychological trauma. It also triggers harmful physiological mechanisms. The state of chronic hypervigilance keeps the body flooded with stress hormones like cortisol. This weakens the immune system, disrupts sleep, and increases vulnerability to physical illnesses. According to those close to her, Diana suffered from frequent insomnia, anxiety attacks, and extreme fatigue. Emotionally, isolation was another devastating blow. Few trusted her completely, and those who did not always have the power to protect her. This loneliness was intensified by the fact that, even when surrounded by people, she felt as if she lived in a kind of glass bubble, visible to the world, but untouchable in the most human sense. This invisible barrier, common to those living with Cassandra Syndrome, creates emotional exhaustion that erodes hope. The cruelest effect was on her ability to trust. The repeated experience of having her warnings ignored or distorted made Diana doubt even the intentions of people who approached her to help. This distrust was not baseless paranoia. It was a defense mechanism, but it was also a trap, as it made it harder to build alliances that could have strengthened her against the system suffocating her. Socially, this pressure turned Diana into an ambiguous symbol. While she inspired empathy and admiration, her image was permanently tied to emotional fragility. This was part of the power game, and the media, along with the monarchy, knew how to keep that narrative alive. Every public appearance was scrutinized, and any sign of vulnerability was exploited as proof that she was not reliable. As the years passed and her separation from Charles became final, Diana tried to rebuild her life, but the specter of persecution never disappeared. She believed she was under surveillance, feared for her safety and, as she had already told close friends, predicted that her death might come from a planned accident. This fear was not just imagination, it was the result of years of observations, experiences, and ignored warnings. Diana's fate was not just a personal tragedy, but a cruel portrait of how truth can be suffocated by structures of power and the manipulation of public perception. Her story is the most striking example that, when someone lives with Cassandra Syndrome, it is not enough to be right. You must face a world willing to distort the truth to protect its own interests. The princess's death in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel was the climax of a life marked by ignored warnings. For those who had always disbelieved her words, there remained the discomfort of realizing that perhaps she had foreseen it all. For those who loved her, there was the pain of knowing that, even surrounded by crowds, she lived alone in her most important struggle, the struggle to be heard. The reflection her life leaves us with is bitter, but necessary. How many times do we dismiss someone's voice simply because it is inconvenient or uncomfortable for our beliefs? How often do we mistake courage for exaggeration, sensitivity for weakness? Diana's story reminds us that when we ignore a legitimate warning, we may not only destroy the credibility of the one giving it, but also contribute to the very disaster they were trying to prevent. Diana's legacy lies not only in her humanitarian work or her iconic image, but in the silent lesson that has echoed since her death, that truly listening can save lives, and that silencing, whether through disbelief or convenience, comes at a price far too high. Moral of the story: never underestimate the weight of an uncomfortable truth. If the life of the Princess of Wales teaches us anything, it is that the courage to speak must be matched by the courage to listen. In the end, ignoring a warning may cost more than we imagine. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, turn on the notification bell to be alerted about our posts. See you in the next video.